This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 91.
When it comes to personalized learning, the answer, the blueprint, is often as personalized to the educator. Like at first I thought it always needs to be the same. And for me, when I've implemented it with folks, I tend to keep to a similar model. That's just maybe what I'm comfortable with as an individual. But I've run into others who do it totally differently, and it's working.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Summative Rogers. Matt, what's going on, man?
Ouch.
It's not a dig at all. It comes up in the episode, but I can truly tell you it is not a dig at all. I think it is something that you do extremely effectively and somewhere that I know you are trying to stretch out of.
You're right.
Not eliminate, because you shouldn't eliminate what you've done so well summatively in your classroom, but definitely an area where you're looking to bring your creative summative aspects into the learning process in your classroom.
Yeah, you know, those words of validation and affirmation, I really appreciate, Ken. You know, I believe them. I know they're true. But I think it kind of leads into our conversation tonight really well. Unfortunately for me, we started this conversation and I think I knew from our guests, fifth word, that Ken has found his new best friend in our guest tonight.
A little bit of bromancing going on for sure.
Absolutely. It's like, 90 some episodes with you, and I 5 words in, I knew at this point we must be in sync or something, but just a fantastic episode tonight.
What would you say was different about this episode than most of our other episodes, or unique?
So I think what we strive to do as a podcast, so what hopefully when we started setting our goals and expectations for this podcast were to take on challenging topics in education and maybe not complete the picture, but to work towards taking theory in education and turning it into reality. I'll use that statement a little bit later in the podcast, but we go in and we meet with a curriculum company and they say, oh, this is the best math program ever. Your scores will do this, that, and the other thing. Or we meet with administrator and they're saying, we're going to try this method that gets all the kids, class-wide participation. We see these things as educators and we know that those are no-brainer wins. It's a win to have all my kids participating. It's a win to have kids, talking at an independent level on high-level skills that often feel like a dream. It's really difficult to see that turn into a reality, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it can happen to me as a teacher. All of that to say, I think tonight is another conversation that I'm fortunate to be a part of that takes a step closer to closing that gap between that theory and reality, and taking some steps perfectly. Cory kind of talks about the bigger scheme of how you look at it. How can you manage and give yourself forgiveness and really dive into it, where you look at it almost as an incremental phase, but looking at those combination really leads to, at the end of it, spoiling what we'll get into, student-centered learning, how that can actually flow in your classroom, even if you are not traditionally an early adopter. Like that's where I am. I've found where I can adapt, even though I know through our conversations that I could do more, and the justification is there. You don't have to sell it to me further. I just need to figure out how it works within my style.
Yeah, I think you hit on everything really well. Just to add a little bit to that, what I enjoyed about our conversation tonight with Cory was, before every recording, we let our guests know, we remind them that nothing is scripted except the exit ticket, or if we happen to do the lesson lens as well. But truly, nothing is scripted in our conversations. We have maybe a couple of bullets that the guests provided us in their entry form, but very little information. It's just all real conversation, and I think we pride ourselves on that. Cory did a great job of throwing things back at us, which I really enjoyed. We always encourage them to do so, and sometimes they don't, just because of the flow of the conversation. Obviously, you and I dominated a little bit more in directing it. That's our role here on the show. But he really did a good job of throwing things back at us, and just I feel like it was a very good three-way conversation. It wasn't a interview at all, and I don't think many of our shows feel that way, but even more so, I think this one was a good showcase of that three-way conversation. So I would like to just jump right into that conversation right now. So let's go ahead and bring Cory Henwood onto the podcast.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Cory. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're super excited to connect with you and learn from you. So kick things off for us, super simple. Just officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you are coming from and just give us a little snapshot of your career in education.
Yeah, well, my name's Cory Henwood, and I work in Southern Utah as Innovation Director in our school district here. And I also help train and prepare teachers and principals for the workplace with some consulting that I do at my website, coryhenwood.com. I've had kind of a career that's run the gamut in education, from teaching in elementary, middle, and high school, several subjects, to being a principal and now director at our county office. So I love education, passionate about personalized, competency-based education, and that's kind of where I try to spend as much of my time as possible.
So you've had a very, like you said, a very full career of different experiences. What would you say is something that has stuck with you throughout elementary, middle school, high school, something that you maybe pushed or were passionate about encouraging with your teachers as a principal and now as a district leader as well? What's been that niche or that passion topic for you?
Yeah, I would say it's about empowering learners and being as student-centered as possible. So part of what I really enjoy doing is helping teachers, because I think that's part of innately what they would like to do. Just not knowing how to do it is part of maybe the disconnect there that you don't see in maybe an elementary, middle, or high school classroom. They just have never seen it done or experience that as a learner themselves. And so I really enjoy helping people to, one, see that in models that I've worked with, as well as, engage in that work themselves through some learning that's personalized to them.
So I'm good.
Matt, do you want to just exit the room?
Yeah,
now?
I know. Well, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say, Cory, unfortunately for the next hour, I may not get another question in. Your values align very similarly to Ken's. And for anyone that's been listening week after week,
spot on.
Yeah, week after week, you'll hear that, I am that hesitant teacher that, I'm not necessarily doubting the value of student-centered learning or the value of, really putting as much responsibility, because with that responsibility is they're doing as much learning and creating and collaboration as possible. I guess my question for you, we said before the interview, there's no scripted questions, but I continue to ask this question. So I'm going to hit you with this. curriculum from our end is becoming more and more scripted. Here's an expected response. Here is, which direction to look in, what your face should look like. It almost seems like it's almost foolproof at this point. So I guess the two parts of this question is, with a passion like that, how do you grant permission to teachers to recognize that scripted curriculum has a purpose, but that you don't need to embody that scripted curriculum? I guess I'll ask that question and then I'll follow up afterwards.
Yeah. It's a tough situation to be in when those who, are in your charge are in a place where they need to follow a scripted curriculum. I guess my place as an administrator and as a leader is to give my teachers permission, and similarly to the same values I hold for students, to empower them to take on what they know is best for their students. And so, not to say to, disregard the curriculum, of course, or throw it out or not follow the curriculum, but to use it in a way that's going to be at a place where they can meet the needs of students, and not just one size fits all, but say, hey, here's where we need to learn today. Where are you at? Let me offer some targeted instruction based on your needs, and allow you to extend your learning if you already understand this topic, instead of sitting through it and sleeping through my class, right? So I think that there's a place for where we should be in the curriculum, right? The pacing guide, potentially, right? This is where our whole team is covering this. We're going to have a common form of assessment on this. I see obviously there's value and research in that, but there's also value in meeting the students where they're at and allowing the teacher the flexibility to meet their students where they're at. So that's maybe the balance that I try to strike with those who have that type of scripted and very strict curriculum pacing.
So I guess my follow-up
Well,
question...
can I ask you though, Matt?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to, for you, when you're in that space, it sounds like you're in that space, right? So do you feel like that you're in a space where you feel that kind of empowerment as a teacher to take it in a direction you want, or do you feel like you're pretty much in a box? And I don't know if you're comfortable answering.
Yeah, no, I'm totally comfortable. Hopefully, by all means, I'm comfortable to answer that. I feel like in our school district, even though they've adopted curriculums that have scripted components, that they give us the permission to do whatever we feel like is in the best interest of kids. And that's what we are professionals in, taking material and delivering in a way that's going to be most successful to kids. It is a great baseline. I have a student teacher right now. It is great to witness, his first few lessons, reading that word for word, midway through our experience, recognizing it's a baseline, and then towards the end of the experience, looking to, make that come to life. I guess my challenge, and this is kind of what my second question to you was going to be, is, my district has given me the permission, but you kind of led with this opening of, just because we were given the permission, we don't necessarily have a model of what it necessarily looks like. I'm the type that if you show me how to do it, then I can replicate it over and over again and, add flair, but I need to see it before I jump in. Whereas Ken was someone that years ago recognized, like, I know this is good for kids. I'm going to figure out and pave that way. And so week in and week out, I get to ask Ken and guest questions about this experience so that I can bring more and more into my classroom. But without that blueprint or that model saying, this is a fourth grade example of a year-long plan in these subject areas that meet the style of kids and demographics I live in, like all of those features have so many outliers that it's difficult to say to myself that I'm doing student-centered learning justice. I know it's a continuum that you work on, but I think that's where I get hung up on as, I feel like stepping away, I'm willing to do as long as I felt like I was doing it justice, if you will.
Yeah. Well, man, you're not alone in that. I guarantee you. Most teachers are in that place where they want to do something that, one, is going to be empowering to them, is going to allow them to focus on student to teacher relationships and really be centered on the student's needs. Like, they want to do that. but getting to that place is a difficult next step. Part of what I do in our district is we have some of these models in our district. They're not every school in our district, right? But we have some of these models that then I can take and allow teachers the time to come and visit those models, to see them, to engage in micro credentials that help them learn where they need to go next, right? What are the next steps, the tools, pay them for that work, right? Just to really not just incentivize, but support and again, to empower them, right? To make the moves that they want to make. Because ultimately, if you're feeling like, yeah, that's a nice thing over there, but I don't know, how to get from here to there. You just can't make any moves, right? So that's part of the role of a good, I would think, administrator or professional development or coach, is to help them see the path, see the next step that you could take to get to that place. And sometimes most teachers need to see the end product first. Like, what is it going to look like? That whole year plan, like you alluded to, Matt, right? What is it going to look like if I take these next, 5-6 steps in that direction? So you're not alone, and I'm glad you spoke up and just didn't exit the room.
Well, and I'll jump in. I'll jump in before Ken, because I actually have a question for both of you. Since you are kind of single-minded, and you'll kind of be that pie in the sky, I guess I feel like in a student-centered classroom, our goal is to hand over as much responsibility to the kids as possible. And so, not necessarily like you're not doing the job, it's setting up experiences for the kids that they can process through. Like that, your role ends up being processing through the emotions and the trial by error, and like those type features ends up being the value. I think educators can see why that would be of value. But what is that experience like for your end to empower students? And I don't mean, I know it's good for kids, but how do you acclimate yourself without a model to say, I know that I'm doing this job to the best of my ability. I know that I'm doing justice by kids. I know that the experience is worth it, because you don't have, that, future to look back and say, I know it's going to be like, you're depending on the theory that it's going to be beneficial until you're depending on the proof. But that's a big jump to, spend 60, 90, 180 days to prove that it was worthwhile. How do you gain that courage or just knowledge that, what you're doing is worthwhile when you're empowering kids?
Yeah, I can jump in. Not everyone is at a place where they're going to be willing to make that jump, right? In the bell curve of innovators, right? You have many folks in the happy middle, and many of them even on the left side of that curve, who are maybe a little more of on the side of laggard, like waiting to see that proof, are not gonna move until they see that model. And that's actually just fine, in my opinion. That's just fine that we have just a small few, and maybe there's, some folks like Ken who are in that boat, right? That want to spend the time, are willing to take a bunch of the risks, and don't know, frankly, if it's going to work out. And that's where, one of the schools that I started recently, Launch High School, was in that boat. Many of the teachers never had taught in that model before, came over because they just felt the passion, thought it could work, and frankly went through several iterations to try to get it to a place where it's at just in a few years. And now, test scores are, well above the rest of the district, 15, 20 points higher. And they feel now confident that the proof is in the pudding, but they were not there. In fact, in the first 6 months opening the school, it was like, holy crap, is this going to work? I don't know. And maybe not, that's a place where the innovator lives. And that's not for everybody. And I totally think that it's important to have those people out the front. They maybe model it a little bit. We start to see the proof is in the pudding, and then folks are willing to fall behind. And that's just a path that I'm comfortable with. I don't expect everybody to be comfortable with taking those steps forward. I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. So just to circle back before I answer your question, Matt, Cory, we're totally in line in terms of vision, in terms of passion. Just even the words you're using, empowering, the keynote that I gave to a district earlier this year, the theme of the presentation was empowering experiences. And so it was really the driving passion and mission of my classroom with that. And so, Matt, in terms of gaining confidence in in doing this, I think one, you have to be willing to take a small risk. If you are, to use your analogy, Cory, if you're on that right side of the bell curve and you are the innovator, you're taking a huge risk. But if you're seeing one other person do it, you're taking a little bit of a smaller risk following their model. And I also think I would always look at, what else do I think the kids are going to gain from this? I think it's very fair to assume, or to I'll say assume, that when you deliver a lesson, regardless of your format, there is a strong possibility that a few, or many students will not learn the content at all. We have lessons that fail. We tried to teach a certain method, just didn't work. We got to try it again. Or, everybody was off that day, or I was off that day. There are factors that play into lessons not succeeding. And that happens year in and year out, regardless of our experience level. And so what I always thought to myself, and now what I encourage when I'm coaching and working with teachers, is we're going to try this. We think we're hitting these curricular standards by doing this activity. It could flop, but your basic traditional lesson could flop too. But we know that by creating this experience, the students are going to collaborate more. They're going to take a risk themselves. They're going to learn how to do research. They're going to learn how you can list all of these skills that they're going to experience by creating that opportunity. So even if the lesson flops, there's still all these other things that students gain. And that's kind of where I always generated my confidence from, knowing that it might not hit the curriculum as well as I had hoped, but I know my students are going to gain something from it. And I do think there's value in teachers seeing it. I've seen that now as a coach with supporting them, giving them opportunities to go observe another teacher. I'll cover their class so they can see a different teacher who's using a style of instruction that they're very interested in. I think that's really important for teachers. So if you're a coach, try to find ways to do that. If you are a teacher, ask your principal, ask a leader, ask a coach in your district, hey, can you cover my class? I would really like to see this person. Or ask, I really want to try centers. I don't know what that looks like. Is there anyone in the district that I can go watch their class? Who is it? Can you help me set that up? Ask to utilize the experts that exist in your district, because there are so many great teachers that do so many great things. And I think that's where confidence can come from as well. And I just want to hit on one more thing real quick about the programs, Matt, is I don't think there's any reason to abandon the programs. And one of the schools I was just working with, this was a big topic of conversation. And when I was teaching fifth grade, especially in math, we used everyday math, which is pretty scripted. I abandoned the script, but I didn't abandon any of the content or the resources. So instead of everybody doing journal page 65 at the same time, everybody ended up doing journal page 65, but they may have done it independently without any instruction from me because they already showed mastery of that skill. They may have done it after their small group meeting with me and then do it independently, or maybe they did it sitting with me. So I was still using all of the resources from the program, but I was just delivering it in a different order or in a different manner. And so the games, instead of everybody playing, the multiplication game that was involved with the lesson, it became part of their independent work. It was, you should play this game for 20 minutes, find a time with a partner to do that. So I think there are ways to still strongly use the programs, and you can even still use the instructional scripts, but maybe you can do that script with only the kids that are on grade level in a small group lesson, because those scripts are intended for the typical fourth grade kid. So deliver that script to the typical fourth grade kid in a small group, but do something better and different for your lower students and your higher students. So it obviously takes strategy and work, but it's also a great way to not give yourself more work, to implement student-centered learning. You don't have to create all the centers. You don't have to create all the materials. Use the programs, just be creative in the way that you're kind of laying it out to the kids.
I like that. Can I dive in just a little bit into what you said?
Please.
About when you take on something new, there are some things you don't know, like how well it might hit the curriculum versus your traditional lesson. How might it impact standardized test scores, right? If I do something for the whole year. But there are some things that you do know, and those are powerful. Those are things that I know I'm giving my students more opportunities to collaborate, to communicate, to create new things. Those are things I know for sure I'm doing. Is that going to show up at the end of level assessment? I don't know. Maybe that deeper learning will, maybe it won't. Does that matter? Is that important? Part of being an administrator for a new school like this is about giving your staff permission to say, look, we're going to do it differently. The impact on the state assessment isn't the only benchmark that we're going for here. For example, in our district, we have a portrait of a graduate. We have these essential skills that students are trying to meet. They weren't measured in the same way. Recently, I've been part of the state's redesign of their school accountability calculus, if you will, including portrait of a graduate measures that indicate, hey, if a school is working on building collaboration, communication, other skills, that's going to increase their accountability grade, if you will, which is neat. But it's not always been that way. And to tell my staff at the beginning, hey, look, we're not sure how this model of reducing the standards that we teach to the minimum, to the guaranteed viable curriculum, making sure students are competent in those, and then diving deeper into this project-based format, how it's going to play out. It ended up working out in both realms. Both we see students for sure collaborating, communicating, creating at a higher level, but we also see them now assessing better. But giving that permission at the beginning allows many folks who are feeling like, oh, this anxiety about how is it going to work out, a little bit of permission to breathe. And you have to reinforce that. I might have said that at every PLC meeting, in the first 6 months when people are like, oh my gosh, but they don't, it's not like it used to be, and we just need to say that a lot.
Yeah, I can't underestimate the value of an administrator giving those permissions, especially with programs. Over and over again saying it's okay if you deviate as long as you have a reason or you have data to support it, or you can point to, these things that you're seeing from your students and why you're doing that. The school that I was working at, the teachers were very positive. They were very open-minded. They were very receptive to some of the strategies I was sharing. And it's because their principal keeps reiterating these ideas. He's bringing me back 4 different times. So he's showing a commitment from his end to say, like, listen, I'm passionate about this. I want to see this happen. I'm providing you a support measure to accomplish that. And so I think it's so important for administrators to do that, because teachers do have that fear of, getting their hands slapped, or, all of those components that come along with it, I think are realistic for teachers to feel. And so it's really important for administrators to do that. And Matt, I'll let you jump in right after this. I just want to say on the piece of data for my scores, Pennsylvania teachers are measured on, their state scores and a couple other things and showing growth. My math scores were always high. I'm really good at teaching math. My reading scores were not nearly as high, and they progressively got a little bit better each year of my career. And I don't think it has anything to do, I'll say I won't claim it has anything to do with the fact that I became more student-centered. I think it's because I became a better reading instructor. And so I don't think that the scores, the environment I created had a massive or any positive effect on my test scores, but they didn't diminish my test scores in any way. But one of my favorite measures was administrators coming into my room saying, I can't believe the conversation I just had with a 5th grader, because my students were forced to be more independent, have more conversations, know what was going on in the classroom. So that was always a fun measure that I would get when different administrators would come into the room.
All right, so I'm gonna challenge you guys both again, and I guess I'll say parameter of what you can think about, and then I'm gonna kind of follow up with the why. So the parameters might be, what is your in your theory, what is your end product? Whether that's looking at it through the lens of a single lens, like a lesson, from a module, from a, year long, how are you envisioning this student-centered environment? And the context behind that is, I think, us as educators, that, I hope that I'm a little bit on the more advanced end of that bell curve, Cory, that you were mentioning of, I may not be an innovator. I may not be there. I'm not against it. I think what you guys are mentioning is very much the theory of it. And what Ken and I really strive for is, how do we take theory that we get pitched from a lot of PR educational companies saying, why is our product great? How do we create that blueprint to say, this is how you dedicate your life to student-centered? Because when I hear someone that's student-centered, I hear the theory, I know it's good, but I recognize that I need to be such a master of curriculum to say, oh, this learner is excelling. I'm going to give them 4 options within this curriculum that they could go towards. This learner is struggling. I'm going to create 4 additional options that I can match based off their learning style. And when I'm thinking, every learner having all these different routes, and this week I'm working on personal narratives, and next week I switch to poetry, in math where it's build off each other. Yeah, I could see how student-centered makes sense. But in a subject area like science, where I go from teaching ecosystems to electricity to forces of motion to weather, there's not continuity between that I know that everyone's start date and end date is usually pretty much the same, even though their path is not necessarily there. That feels really overwhelming as an educator to say, I agree with you, Cory. If I could have my students, driving their own education, that's what I want. Ken, I would love to have those conversations. I feel so overwhelmed to create one learning path with differentiation compared to what it takes to put together the full picture.
Yeah. Part of my answer, the first is that when it comes to personalized learning, the answer, the blueprint, is often as personalized to the educator. Like at first I thought it always needs to be the same. And for me, when I've implemented it with folks, I tend to keep to a similar model. That's just maybe what I'm comfortable with as an individual. But I've run into others who do it totally differently, and it's working, and maybe not the way I would do it. So that's the first caveat, because I'm going to give an answer that might not be the answer for everybody. You know what I'm saying? But part of my answer might deal with, like, the 4 PLC questions, and laying out what you do in a way that what students need to know, right? What is it that students need to know? And in my opinion, it's minimizing that to what is guaranteed viable curriculum. What does that look like in your classroom? So you identify that first. And the second, so it's not everything. It's not the whole scope and sequence. It's not the whole script. And that's maybe anyway, that's how I roll. And then the second piece is to go and say, how do we know students are going to know it? How can they demonstrate it? I like to give lots of options there. Doesn't need to be 50 options, but a few options. And what's learner, age level appropriate? Maybe it's only 2 options in some, grades and age levels, but in some cases it can be many more, that they can demonstrate their learning on those targets. And then next I have to put a whole series of, what am I going to do if they don't know it? A whole set of plans together, an intervention, a way that I'm going to be able to target instruction inside the classroom. I need to have those structures well defined in my plan. And then lastly, a place for them to extend. And for me, that's always been in projects. I really love design thinking and students engaging in design thinking as part of a project to apply their learning, to solve real problems, come up with solutions, and extend their learning, and develop those human skills, those transferable skill sets like collaboration, communication, and dive deeply into those and developing those. Because part of the end product for me, Matt, that you said, like, what's the end product look like? the product that comes out is obviously competency in my expectations of my curriculum. But for me, just as important is that they develop those essential skills, those transferable skill sets that we know are important no matter what they do in their future, no matter what career they go into, entrepreneur, or frankly, staying at home and just being a good member of the community. You need those skill sets. And that's part of what I want to develop in learners. So that's really important to me as well. So that's a part of the blueprint where I would take people through that to help them get to a place where they can personalize the learning with their students.
So I'll take a totally different route on that. So the thing I always encourage with teachers is think about your year, think about units coming up. When are you going to approach a time where you're going to teach a new skill and you're going to have kids that are way up here and they're way down here and some that fall in the middle? And that's your opportunity to dive into some sort of student-centered learning framework. That's your target time to do it. So instruction is typically geared towards the middle of the road, kids that are on grade level. And then we know that if you have that wide range, you're going to have a set of students, whether it's 1, 5, or 8, however many, that are way above that and are bored out of their minds, and students that are way below that and they're completely lost. So that's where I tell teachers to start. So once you've identified when you think that is, you need to collect some sort of data. And it should be really simple. It should be very quick to assess. It should be highly automated, and it should be very intentional. So I just did this yesterday with when I went to visit a school. I provided them a Google form the week before for the kids to complete. It was 4 questions, 2 adding decimals, 2 subtracting decimals. I was very intentional where 1 question required carrying, 1 question had an uneven amount of place values. So I could identify, do they get it or not? And do they understand carrying, or do they understand like lining the place values up? So I was able to glean 5 different groups from those 4 questions. 2 were adding, 2 were subtracting. I only went in to teach adding for the day. I had students that already showed they mastered this skill. I was not going to waste their time teaching them how to do a skill they've already shown mastery. So that's that upper level set of students. You're avoiding wasting their time. You can push them right into enrichment. Maybe that's just word problems. Maybe it's a project like you talked about, Cory. Maybe it's just an opportunity to be creative. Let them design a screencast to teach one of their classmates. There's so many things you can do with those higher level students that actually don't require a lot of work on yourself, because I think enriching is usually the hardest thing for teachers to do. It's a lot easier for us to just sit with a student who's struggling and just, help them, provide them time, provide them with supports, manipulatives, different strategies to bring them up. And then with those lower level students, I'm going to give them more time with me to build them up towards the skill. And then the students that are on grade level that showed they probably have a decent understanding, they watched a screencast. And then when they met with me, we did 3 practice problems. They clearly knew it. And I said, see you later. Another thing that I encourage with that is don't worry about the size of your groups. Research will say the ideal small group size is 4 to 6, 5 to 7, something like that. I always like to say that's research written by a person who's never had 30 kids in a classroom, because that's just not realistic. Some groups might have 2, some groups might have 12. If that's what the data tells you, that's what you do, because there's nothing more important than delivering the instruction that the kid needs, even if it creates uneven groups. And so I think that data piece is important because it's the science that enhances the art. The way you're facilitating the lesson is all an art, but you had some science to provide you with the best opportunity to do that. So I'm trying to be as concrete as possible. So in terms of that blueprint, I would encourage teachers, start in the point in your year or unit you're confident in that you're going to have a wide range of abilities, and just find a way to split your students up and just provide them with the instruction they need. Don't worry about centers. Just give them a list of independent activities to do when they're not with you. Even if those activities are a little fluffy, that's fine, because that time with you is more important. Then you'll get better at the other activities. But giving them that time with you, I just think is invaluable.
I like the way we laid that out. Hopefully that's helpful for you, Matt, because mine was more like, how do you prepare for a year of personalized learning, right? Identify all the targets and assessment and your plans and systems. And Ken's is more about, the day that you're planning that lesson, how you're going to deliver it. Those two pieces combined, obviously, are where you'll want to go, if you will, to making this as concrete as possible for, how to implement this on your own. I really like a lot of, if people are looking for, a little more concrete blueprint, some of the stuff that Ed Elements puts out in their core 4 of personalized learning, this idea of data-driven instruction and targeted instruction and using flexible content to allow students to access, independent work and also owning their own work and their progress and reflecting on it. That's part of that everyday routine that makes personalized learning work. And I really like the model that Ken threw out there. That's great.
So I'd love to transition the conversation slightly, but it's probably going to still circle around these topics. So you mentioned about starting I think you called it a launch school, which I remember reading up as I was looking up some things about you. And so I got the feeling it was like more of a project-based learning school where everybody's on board with that type of instruction, but it's the only school in your district that has, for lack of a better term, still other regular schools. What has the experience been like just on starting that and being a part of that? And also, do you ever envision a time where the pendulum shifts to, it's just what we're all doing? Like, why are some districts implementing these special schools that only some kids get to be a part of when like you said, the proof is in the pudding? It's clearly obvious. There's so many more benefits to this. You still keep the scores up, all of those stuff that whether or not we think is important, it's still there, and all of the other components.
Well, I certainly hope that we see a lot more of those models. I'm not sure we'll be at a point anytime soon where we'll see that for every student because it just is going to take a long time to get to a place, and that might happen. I'm really, encouraged by the work of states, including our state in Utah, who develop frameworks and funding mechanisms to help encourage this type of innovation, for one, and two, to actually encourage it in elements like school accountability, school assessment. All of that work is actually shifting. Even our new effective teaching standards, where teachers are evaluated, are all aligned to this more personalized competency-based learning. So that's really encouraging for me, because not only are they getting this space where they're seeing innovation happen, they're seeing that it's working, but they're also seeing that the system is changing at the state level. The rules, the goalposts, the metrics are all moving in that direction. So hopefully that encourages folks to take that leap, if you will, where it's just difficult to want to do that as an educator when you've seen success with what you're doing. It's maybe more easy to swallow if you're in a place where nothing's been working for many years, right? But to come into a place that's been traditionally successful and say, hey, we've got more, it's not always well received. And that's maybe where we were at as a district, to be honest. A lot of the schools who were at a place where they're like, hey, we're doing okay. We've been at this for a long time. And, we come in with a new idea and a new opportunity, and not everybody's at a place even now, 3 years into the school, that and it's been successful, that we're seeing everybody go, oh yeah, we need to be teaching like that. It's just not going to happen in that short a time.
So I guess, as, innovators, right now you're in this space, both of you, where you're trying to gain followers of other teachers in your teaching style. What is, instead of will other people be joining, that it becomes the norm, what is kind of your future that you're thinking, this is next level version of student-centered learning? What are some of those goals that you're setting that, hey, I want to get to this point, that I'm challenging myself to say, not only are they going to be student-centered, but they're going to be, this? What are your future goals looking like to again, do best by kids now that you've gained confidence in the methods through student-centered?
Well, part of the goal is expansion. You almost made it sound like a cult for
Sorry
a second,
about that.
so I'm not trying to pull in all the followers. I know, I get what you were saying, but part of it is, I want this for my kids, for all kids. I want this opportunity for many more, and not just for students, but for teachers. It's crazy. The working with these teachers I've worked closely with at the schools that I've been able to do this at, they have transformed. Like, they love their job. They love coming into work. They like helping students with their personalized projects. They like meeting with students in small groups and one-on-one to help them get, and those light bulb moments that we love as teachers, those rarely happen when you're standing in front of a room of 30 that you see the light bulbs on over everybody's head. You see that in those small groups, those one-on-one situations more often. And so we're just making more of those moments. And I want teachers to experience that. So I want my kids, I want students to experience that. And I want more teachers to experience that. Not clearly you didn't mean it, but not for the way of like increasing some sort of following, but it's really about, I just want that for teachers. So many teachers are burnt out right now. The idea of following a particular script and doing it the same way and not seeing results, and in fact seeing maybe less and less results over time as students need more individualized attention and come from a variety of backgrounds. They're just at a point where they need something different, and I hope that they find it. I hope that this is maybe something that works for many more.
Cory, what do you think is the biggest initial hurdle for teachers to get past in terms of implementing student-centered learning? Because I very rarely have been involved in an experience where a teacher sees it in action, especially when they get to see their colleagues do it, and then they do it for the first time. I can't remember a time where they didn't say, wow, that was really cool. Like, I can't believe that many students didn't get that, or I learned so much more about the students when I was able to see them in a smaller group. So what do you think is the biggest hurdle for them to initially get past to try it for the first time? And maybe I'll even ask you to delineate that between elementary and secondary, because I do think it's a different environment when talking about doing small group learning versus when you compare elementary to secondary.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest overall first barriers is overcomplicating it, in my opinion. So that's part of why I started with the idea of simplifying and reducing to what's most essential and focusing there, because the time to get there when you're in a student-centered place is much more variable, right? You have students who are going to take longer, but I'm going to expect you to be at a place where you're competent by the end of it, and I'm going to give you all the supports you need to get there. That doesn't happen if you're necessarily following a very strict pacing guide where I need to move quite as quickly as we may have done in the past. So that means some reduction, but that also means students are more competent in the things they need to know by the end of the day. So overcomplicating it, thinking that I need to cover it all, that I need to hit all the pieces that I've traditionally done, is one. And two, what I find maybe most different at the elementary and secondary level is the role of the teacher. What does that need to look like? And so maybe in your traditional classroom at the secondary level, you gave some time for independent practice and you want some students to practice things independently. But at the same time, you expect some defined pacing for students. You expect students by the end of the quarter to have mastered all the topics by the end of the quarter, or they're going to get a poor grade. So that kind of pacing piece is different in the secondary, whereas in the elementary side, I would say it's more about controlled environment and letting go of maybe the traditional structures of what I've seen work in my classroom management style for many years. That seems to be a barrier for some, but you guys would probably know better, given that that's more of your background, what you see working for teachers. Are they willing to give up that type of control in both, how the structure of the classroom works and feels, and when an administrator comes in and you've got students over here doing one thing and students over here and you're only working with 4 up at this table at the front, is that okay? It looks a little crazy, you know what I mean? So that's where I see for the elementary teachers I've worked with. But what do you guys think?
Matt, you want to jump in first? What do you think has been some of your own personal hurdles? Because I think, just to clarify, I know sometimes you like to just play this role in our conversation. You're great at student-centered learning after the learning, summatively, them showcasing their understanding. It's in the learning process that I think is where you struggle more. So what do you think are either yours or your colleagues, biggest initial hurdles with implementing it in the learning process versus the summative showcasing process?
I think so. When my door is closed is different than when I'm collaborating with grade level partners. So I guess I'll answer it from the two realms. Seeing the pacing of my co-teachers and seeing that, in a very direct conversation, they're getting through content quicker than I am, can feel, again, it comes down to trust. Ken said in the past that he would always start out, and he may start on the same opening concepts and learn them very firmly. And that time is always well spent when you get to October and your colleagues are going through the, expectations for the 7th time in the school year, and you don't have to worry about it. So when that intimidation of, oh, they're already on lesson 7 and I'm on lesson 4, how do I, if I'm the one in charge of the talking, I can be in charge of the pacing. So that is, when the doors are opening the initial amount. I think it's confidence and trust. I mentioned this a little bit before, but when it comes to instruction, being the puppet master is intimidating, even if you feel like you know the curriculum. When I'm in control, I know how the flow is going to go. The idea of, our students bringing examples and you're using their examples instead of yours that you pre-created, their questions. And, we all utilize teachable moments, but student-centered ends up being, much more than just teachable moments. It's, teachable curriculum in some ways, or at least it feels like. So I can see, like my kids, Cory, for example, I do not tell kids how to prove their learning to me. I show them at the beginning of the year anything that they feel like does a good job of describing their understanding. Here are a bunch of options that I've seen before. Here's what it is. Long story short, we identify what are those benchmark items you have to include, which is kind of, Cory, what you were mentioning. Here are the minimums that you need to, if it's a vocabulary word activity, then you need to identify that you can use them in the context of actual usable sentences, all of those features. That is what's comfortable right now. The idea of not being in control of how that information is delivered is concerning, because if I know that I said it in a clear, succinct way, then I can hold kids accountable that they had been instructed in it so that they could showcase it. If they are, jigsawing where they're going and researching on their own and we're summarizing, I'm hoping that that short Google form, Ken, that you're referencing is going to showcase, non-guessing understanding of material that I have to depend on. And that's really scary to, put all of your, chips in that corner. I don't know if that answers the question for you, Ken.
No, I think it does. And I think the pacing overall is definitely one of the biggest hurdles, especially at secondary. I feel like the secondary teachers put more pressure on themselves for pacing, and maybe there is more pressure on them overall, just with grades being more heavily reported and all those types of things. So I think that pressure is very real, where teachers, what they feel is really, even if some of it is what they put on themselves. And, I only say this to teachers that I have a strong relationship with, because it's a little bit of a confrontational thing to say, but you can tell me that you are on pace for, your curriculum, but are your students on pace? You can go at any pace that you want. You can teach lessons at any pace that you want, but it doesn't mean that your students are following that same pace. And so I think that's where student-centered learning gives you another advantage, where you're going to be able to move more students at a more successful pace. And promise you it will pick up speed the more and more and more as you go through the year. It's going to be that old school steam engine train. It takes a long time to get started, but as it picks up speed, it keeps going faster and faster and faster, and it will peak out at some point. But there's a big difference between a teacher moving at a curriculum pace and students moving at that curriculum pace. So Cory, as you're in your position, now as more of a district leader, what has been one of the more empowering components for you in terms of working with teachers and students?
Yeah, I really enjoy trying to follow that same model of personalization with teachers and with principals. So helping them find out where they're at. I rarely will come in with an objective that is defined by me. I might have a series of things that we might work on, but ultimately I like to find where do they want to go next, and help them get there. And ideally, if I were to say to Matt's question earlier about like where I'd like to see students go, wouldn't it be nice if the students were as dialed in and as self-aware about where they need to go and where they are now, and you could just help them take the next step all the time. Right now, it's still, even in a learner-centered environment like we see at launch, students are still saying, okay, what's the next thing I need to do, teacher? What's the next thing I need to be competent in? It's not necessarily about, hey, these are my goals, these are my ambitions, this is where I'm at now, and help me get to the next place. It's just about kind of going through the set number of standards. So I feel the same way when I work with adults, that instead of saying, hey, I want to tell you the 15 steps of the ladder and we're on step 9, that we can move around a little bit based on where they're at and where they would like to go next. And I try to make that connection with them personally first. And that's what leads our work. So that's again, empowering for me because we're connected. It's a personal thing. It's not necessarily very scripted. And I enjoy working that way.
So thinking about all of your experience since you've left the classroom officially, being a leader, a coach, a district leader, if you went back to, and you can pick the grade level and you can tell us what it is, if you went back to that grade level tomorrow and you were going to finish out the year teaching that class, what have you learned since leaving the classroom that would absolutely become a part of your daily or weekly experience for the students that was not there before?
I'm a little bit of more of a rebel maybe now than I was then. And I would say that I would take a few more liberties in terms of trying to get my students to a place where I feel like they're developing more of those essential skills. I was very curriculum focused before and could meet the targets of the curriculum, which I still think is important, by the way. I'm not dissing that, but I would more intentionally focus on some of those skills that I know are going to help students to be successful. Those skills that lead to those conversations like you were talking about, when you can have a conversation with a student who's been self-directed, who's self-aware, who understands where they're at and how to set and meet goals. That's really impressive. That's impressive for anybody you meet in life, and I want to build those skills in my students. And so I would more intentionally and more explicitly instruct and provide experiences for students to develop those skills. And even at the expense of some time spent on my curriculum, I would take that chance.
Kind of leads into that soft skills that, I wish it wasn't called soft skills, because they are the critical skills that we learn, so much about our career. You can either teach or you can't teach. You learn your curriculum after the fact. And that is so accurate for a lot of professions. You can either, I can't go turn into an artist tomorrow. I just don't have those skills naturally. So those soft skills of how to navigate that and have those confidence. I appreciate, being on this conversation. And Ken, I will take the compliment. As mentioned, we are looking at very obvious things in education that everyone agrees with. But the challenge is jumping off that diving board to say what once you get started in the hamster roll of student-centered learning, it's not like you're going to get off, because even if you're tired, even if you know that it's, good for kids, the kids crave it, once you give them that freedom. And that is the challenge. Maybe going back to your question earlier, Ken, if you're going to commit to it, it's not like, a flipped lesson where you do one of them and try it again in 2 weeks from now, or 2 months from now. It's one of those things that if you make that shift, you're gonna see positive results that A, are addicting, B, Cory, like you mentioned, make you want to go back to school, but boy, oh boy, are they exhausting at the end of the day. But it goes back to that classic work worth doing. And I think we all recognize it's work worth doing. We just, like, using another cliche, working smarter, not harder. The way that this goes about is a very clunky process because, as you mentioned, Cory, unfortunately, personalized learning is a lot of work personally. Getting to know each individual child and figuring out what they need. When does that become our responsibility instead of just a good thought for educators? Because right now it seems like that personalized learning is what you should do. Soon, I think it's going to be what we need to do, and just part of that expectation, because it will prove itself to be worthwhile.
Yeah, the crazy thing is, if the focus of teachers for so long has been on delivering curriculum and assessing whether it's been retained, right? And machines can do that, frankly. And I don't mean that to sound, belittling to teachers, but if that's what our focus is, then we may be replaced by machines, automated learning, software, whatever you want to call it. If instead our focus, which is way more empowering, instead our focus is on connecting with individuals, right, with students, and meeting their needs, and delivering opportunities for them to develop those human skills, those essential skills that no machine's going to automate, right? Like those communication skills, those collaboration skills, those creative thinking skills. If that's more of our focus, maybe not entirely our focus, but more of our focus is there, one, we're going to feel way more fulfilled. Our students are going to be better prepared for the future. And we can complement the work of the traditional teacher with the work of machines to help us get to a place where we can focus more on what is ultimately a more empowering future for education. So,
and I think that's truly where the sweet spot is when you bring those components in, you'll find that your expertise as a curriculum deliverer still happens. It just happens in a different manner, and you may take one step back to move 3 steps forward, but we can still accomplish those traditional goals with all the new components involved in there as well. So I could talk about this all night, but I do want to be cognizant of our time and jump into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I would say it's to know their aspirations, to know why or where they want to go, and just to know them, maybe what makes them tick, what their interests are. That may have nothing to do with your curriculum, but 1, they're going to feel like they belong. 2, they're going to feel like you have their best interests in mind if you're continually bringing up their aspirations and interests, right? And 3, you can have the opportunity to connect those things, those aspirations and interests, with your curriculum and make it all the more meaningful.
We've had many answers that all focus around, relationships with students, knowing your students, and that's because it is so important. But we've never had anybody specifically talk about the knowing your students' aspirations. I really like that.
So what is the best piece of advice that you've received? And it could be from a colleague, maybe a supervisor, or even a student that you think of frequently when, supercharging your day to make it student-centered.
Yeah, best piece of advice I would have received is to keep it simple. This was actually from a boss I didn't like all that much. Funny enough, Sometimes I like to make the master blueprint, and I just do that. I'm that kind of detailed personality. And often when I do that, I think through everything. And I think there's a lot of educators that do this too, right? But I found some power in trying to keep it a little more simple. And one of the ways I do that is to design it with others, because I get sometimes in my own head and I have the master plan, and that doesn't get too well conceived once it's past my own nose, right? And out into the world. So designing with others and to keep it simple is part of what I like to do, even when it comes to things that might seem complicated, like personalized learning.
I have found in my own experience and helping other teachers that, especially when you're trying to give students creative opportunities, I think the best thing you can do is provide them as little direction and instruction as possible, because you see where they are lost and then you can clarify. And then the next time you do it, you can just make that a part of your initial introduction or your initial instruction. But when you plan everything, you sometimes stifle creativity, and you don't, it's impossible to see where you shouldn't have given them clarification because you've provided them too much information. But it's really easy to see where you should have provided clarification, and easy to fix it then, and then implement, and then continually use that in the future.
So the next one,
yeah, when you get the 30th diorama that looks the same, you kind of know that you went
and
a little
that's the classic, you know, when you
instruction.
edit writing and all of the writings, you know, sound like your voice. We've all done it. It's very normal. So, you know, this has got to be challenging with, you know, foosball hockey behind you and living in St. George, you know, beautiful area of the country by all means. But yes, I know that the year has ups and downs. Like the school year goes in waves. There are, you know, the ups that you're super excited about, but there are definitely days that we struggle to survive. What is something that you can share with educators that helps them power up through those moments of struggle?
Yeah, it's I would say it's take time for balance and your family. There's way too many of us that are all in, frankly, and so when you brought up the foosball hockey table, I've got the bubble hockey table behind me. It's like, you know, I'm from Canada. I love connecting with my family who's into hockey, taking my little guy and my girls out to play hockey. I still don't do it enough, to be honest. Like I still don't do it enough. And but it's what recharges me, and because ultimately part of the reason I'm in education is for my own kids' education and what I want to see for them and in their life. And I can say that until I'm blue in the face, and then spend 90 hours a week at work where they're not there. Does that really add up? Not really. So I need to take that time and give myself permission, and my staff and the people who work for me, a constant reminder of those things, to take time for your family and for yourself.
And it's also great to get lost in, you know, Utah. It's beautiful. So yeah, to get out. That's a hard permission to grant yourself. That's for sure.
It is. It is. Teachers just don't do it naturally, to be honest. So,
and it helps you come back much clearer when you sit down and you focus on your work. So the last question, we've talked about this a lot, so maybe you want to isolate something that we've talked about or share something new, but I'm excited to hear this one from you. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates teachers who constantly seek change, innovation, and new teaching strategies?
What do I tell somebody who's constantly seeking that? Is that what you said?
What do you think just separates them? What is it about the teachers who are willing to try and willing to pursue that and doing that on a daily basis?
Yeah, there's a mindset that comes for someone who's willing to make iteration, and part of it's humility, knowing that you may not have it right all the time. That takes some guts, and so what separates those folks, I think, is this idea of being willing to put yourself out there, being willing to iterate and make changes frequently, being that scientist in the classroom of being willing to experiment, and knowing that sometimes you'll not get it right. being okay with all those things is a special blend. And it's the educator that I'd want for my kids. Sometimes you might want the formula already set out for you, right? That it's already spelled out, and I get that. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of value to someone who's going to find something new that's going to work for my kid that maybe wouldn't have been found if they were just on the factory conveyor belt through the classroom. So,
Cory, this conversation has been awesome, personally for myself, as well as, just for the benefit of our podcast. I know we've really enjoyed it. I will preface this by saying I've checked out your Twitter quite a bit, and the visuals you have there are stunning. Like, just simple, but great reinforcements, and some of the words you have there are just great messages for us educators. What are the best ways for us to continue following along and learning from you in this educational journey?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. I'd be happy to connect with more folks on Twitter. So that's at Cory Henwood, and then at my website, which is coryhenwood.com. So either of those two places are great to connect. I look forward to connecting with others, whether that's I can help them with their journey that I'd be happy to, or if I can learn from you, because that's part of what this is about too. It's not just about the cult following, like we were talking
not the
about
connotation
it.
I
It's
was
about
putting
learning
out there.
together. No, I know. It's okay. You're good. I know. I just jumped there, but no, I love connecting with folks like yourselves. So I really appreciate the opportunity, you guys having me on tonight, and making an opportunity to learn together and work forward for education to make it more empowering for both teachers and students. So.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time coming on with us, Cory. Your district, the school that you're working with, and now your district as a whole is clearly very fortunate to have you as a part of their team, pushing teachers, but not only pushing teachers, but supporting teachers. And I think that putting those two together is what is really empowering them to have aspirations, but also feeling very supported. Everything that we talked about, as well as some of the websites that you shared and your Twitter handle and your website, will all be linked up on our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show91. So everything will be there. You can follow our show on Twitter at powereduup. You can follow me at Ken Ehrman. You can follow Matt at EdTechNeighbor. If you have not already, please subscribe to this podcast. If it's the first time you're listening, these are the types of conversations we're having every week. Matt and I have been so fortunate to be a part of all of these conversations. And I don't say this because this is our podcast, but I truly feel that we are having the best conversations in education because we've just had so many amazing guests that come on and share their passions and share what they do. And it can be very validating for teachers to hear things that they're doing and knowing that others are doing it or getting some new ideas for them to bring to our classroom. And also, please consider leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts because that helps us reach new educators. So, Cory, thank you again for your time. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
As we power down this episode, Cory, you've left us feeling powered up for sure. So appreciate the time. Everyone stay well, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.